Folks, I'm so impressed that at 3:30 on a Thursday, we have so many people in the building. I never thought you would hang around. Thank you for joining us. A special day. Unconventional topic for us today. Although almost all our speakers are experts in the areas of business and the sciences, today's speaker is from Carnegie Mellon School of Design, one of the oldest and most respected programs in North America. I'm pleased to introduce to you Charlee Brodsky, a fine art documentary photographer and professor of photography at the CMU School of Design. After receiving her Bachelor of Arts from Sarah Lawrence College and her Masters of Fine Art from Yale University School of Art, Professor Brodsky has spent her career creating works that deal with social issues and beauty. Some of her most notable projects include the book Knowing Stephanie, which was one of the outstanding books of 2004 by American Association of University Presses. The book Street, which won the Tilly Olson Award in 2007. The book I Thought I Could Fly, Portraits of Anguish, Compulsion and Despair. Sounds like me. And her most recent book, From Molltown to Milltown, which explores the former mill town of Homestead, a suburb of Pittsburgh. Professor Brodsky was chosen as Pittsburgh Artist of the Year for 2012 by the Venerable Pittsburgh Center for the Arts. As part of her teaching at Carnegie Mellon, she works with social service organizations in Pittsburgh, showing her students how photography can be used to tell stories and make connections between people. We're honored to have such a noted artist and educator with us today. Please join me in welcoming our friend, Charlee.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here, and I thank Dean Baybars for extending an invitation to me to visit our beautiful campus in Doha. The title of my talk is Why Photography? And there are two parts to that question that I will address. Specifically, why I teach photography in a university, and next, I will talk about why I love photography. Why photography in a university setting? I've been teaching photography at our university for over 35 years, but now that digital technology makes it so easy to make photographs, and I no longer teach how to make prints in a darkroom, although we still do teach darkroom at the university, what is there to teach? Interestingly, I find that the core of my teaching hasn't changed that much in over the decades, although the technology completely transformed when cameras moved from film to light sensors, from analog to digital. Another big change, too, is that we moved from viewing photographs on paper to predominantly viewing them on screen. But as I said, the core of my teaching remains the same. Teaching students how to use the camera is simple. It takes 30 minutes to describe the camera settings, such as the ISO, aperture, and shutter, and as students become conscious of these settings, they understand how these controls influence the look of their images. Yet, even if you don't understand the mechanics of making a photograph, you can still press the shutter button and get a perfectly exposed image. Camera technology today is extraordinary and extraordinarily easy to use. Even as far back as 1888, camera technology was easy. George Eastman, the founder of Kodak, one of the most successful photography companies of all time, introduced the first snapshot camera in 1888 that he marketed with the brilliant slogan, "You press the button and we do the rest." That was 1888. That was a point-and-shoot camera. Eastman was smart and prescient in technology and business. He recognized that photography would have great appeal to large numbers of people who would want pictures as mementos of their everyday lives. With the introduction of the Kodak, that was the camera's name, at a cost of $25, not a small sum in those days, the taking of photographs was separated from the processing of the film and printing. You no longer needed to be a professional photographer with a darkroom to be a photographer. The Kodak came loaded with 100 frames of film. Once all the frames were taken, the camera was mailed back to Rochester, New York, where the film was processed, and then both 100 photographic prints and the reloaded camera were sent back to the owner. With just a press of a button, with your own camera, you could make your own photographs. Photography, more specifically snapshot photography, was now in the hands of the everyday amateur. You had the equipment literally in your hands to take images, and you did not need any more specialized knowledge or equipment to be a photographer. Camera technology for the masses continued to evolve. In 1900, the Brownie camera was introduced at a cost of $1, much less than Kodak's $25 original price tag in 1888. By 1905, 1/3 of American households owned a camera, and photography became truly a democratic medium. I don't know the percentage of Americans who own a camera today, but those who don't own one may be making some kind of statement or are terribly impoverished and can't afford one. I found these photographs to be very interesting. Kodak, more often than not, marketed his cameras and all the camera technology by using women. So it was always like, even a woman could operate this piece of equipment. And he did that for decades. This was considered, these two pictures are of the Kodak girls. Okay, in the 1920s, Mihaly Nagy, a Hungarian painter and photographer, as well as a professor in the German Bauhaus School, where technology and the arts were integrated, said, "The illiterate of the future will be the person ignorant of the use of the camera as well as the pen." In this statement, Mihaly Nagy suggests that there is a literacy to photography, just as there is literacy with written and spoken language, and that knowledge of photography would be essential in the modern age. Photographs are ubiquitous in our lives. We love photographing our friends, our trips, our memories. We create a record of who we are and where we've been, our personal histories. In addition to personal histories, or our personal photographs, we see photographs all the time on our computer screens, magazines and newspapers, online and in print. It's unusual to open a website, for example, and not see a photograph that orients you on the screen. There are many different kinds of photographs. Press and magazine photographs, which are a quick delivery of information designed to catch our interest and inform us about topical events. And one morning I was in the kitchen, and we always have the New York Times opened on the counter, and there are Syrian refugees. This was in the fall when the world was becoming most aware of the Syrian refugee crisis. And this photograph, probably more than ever, brought the crisis into everyone's home and how everyone could relate to it. This is the boy who washed up on a Greek shore. Advertisements is another kind of photography, which are designed to sell products and keep us current with new fashions, trends, consumables. We have scientific and medical photographs, which show us the world and our bodies. I love this image. I remember seeing this as a young girl in 1965. This is done by a Swedish photographer whose name is Lennart Nielsen. And he basically put a camera in an endoscope, and we saw the developing fetus for the first time. So this was an enormous advance in medical photography, being able to photograph within the body. Editorial photography, which is giving us a particular point of view about a subject. And this is a recent photograph, as is this, done right around Pittsburgh in Flint, Michigan. In Flint, Michigan, we had a major water crisis where lead levels were found to be unacceptably high in the public water system, and the entire community had been drinking water that has basically poisoned the children. A very, very strong photographic essay by Wayne Lawrence, and that has been a very topical subject right now in the United States. Here is another, what I would call editorial. This is done by Donna Ferrato. And before the O.J. Simpson case, in which O.J. Simpson was being accused of murdering his wife, Donna Ferrato had been documenting violence against women in relationships. And it wasn't until the O.J. Simpson case that her subject matter took off and people started looking at what was going on in relationships behind closed doors. We have public service announcements. This is the actress Glenn Close with her sister who has a mental illness. And we have documentary photography, and I have two photographs here that are really quite special in American documentary photography, they were both done during the 1930s. This is one of the most well-known photographs by Dorothea Lange to come out of that period. It was done during the 1930s Depression when Americans were going through extreme hardships, and the government had employed many photographers to go out and document the people and the landscape. This is called Migrant Mother, and when I show this to my students in Pittsburgh, most all of them have seen this through history books and in other ways. This is a photograph by Walker Evans done around the same time, and I put this in because this would be very typical of the landscape that Pittsburgh looked like. This is not of Pittsburgh, but it's of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, but Pittsburgh would have had a very similar feel as this photograph. Then we also have snapshots, and everyone, I hope, has their own family snapshot album. That's me and my daughter. My daughter is now 27, and I no longer have big hair, okay? Then we also have fine art photography. And fine art photography is often seen in galleries and museums, and fine art allows us to experience the world through an artist's sensibilities. This is by Irving Penn, a wonderful, wonderful fine art / commercial photographer. And this photograph is also fine art, although it looks a little bit more casual. This photograph is by a contemporary artist whose name is Jeff Wall. And Jeff Wall's photographs are usually as large as this screen, and they're lit from behind, so they're somewhat in display cases. And he's probably one of the most well-known and respected contemporary art photographers today. And I think sometimes when you see work like this, you wonder what makes this artful. I can't tell you right now because it's taken me a while to understand that too, but I really have gotten behind this work. It's very interesting the way he shows us the very specifics of life, and you can see so much stuff going on. But I can also say that in the arts you have a lot of subjectivity. So you might like something that I don't particularly like. And then also with education, you change your points of view. You learn about a medium and you understand why other people are, why it's so exalted. So what do I teach, and why do I teach photography? Over 35 years ago, I was hired by Carnegie Mellon School of Design to teach photography to design students. I asked myself why our communication and industrial design students should know something about the medium. The set of answers that I came up with then is appropriate today. The core of what I teach, though, as I've mentioned, hasn't changed in 35 years. Photography teaches us seeing in the world. Photography is an excellent medium through which students become aware of their environment. When you hold a camera up to your eye, you're looking at and experiencing the world more intensely. You may be moved by architecture or the lusciousness of your freshly served meal. When you press the shutter and later review the images, you've created documents that have meaning to you. And as you keep your camera by your side and use it often, you are seeing the world deeply and are using its richness as a resource for inspiration, ideas, important memories, and discovery. Photography sensitizes designers to another visual language. Learning the formal skills of making photographs parallels the skills students are acquiring in communication design, composition, surface, line, color, to name a few formal elements, are components common to visual languages. Learning photography is another way of learning to communicate visually. Skills acquired learning photography are transferable to other media and vice versa. Designers show their work through photographs. Students need to be able to document their work and make good presentation slides throughout our undergraduate program and in their careers. In many cases, photographs are the means through which the students will be presenting their work, their abilities, and hence themselves. A portfolio most often consists of documentation images and not the original 2- and 3-dimensional work. And last, designers work with photographs. Photographs are a powerful means of communication. Students need to be visually literate. They need to know how to read as well as how to manipulate photographic imagery to efficiently, effectively, and powerfully communicate ideas. Students will be working with photographs in their careers and need to recognize how photographs package the world. Let's talk a little bit more about literacy. What are we doing when we press the shutter? When we think of written language, we may talk of how an author describes a scene, whether one is analytic in approach, for example, or poetic. With photography, we can talk similarly. And as we can describe the structure and grammar of written language, we can break down the photograph into component parts. So what are some of the component parts of the photograph? Subject. The subject or content of a photograph is the most obvious. This is what we most often see first in a photograph, and the subject will be defined by some of the following elements that I bring up. I'm going to go back, and this is a photograph by Louis Hine, a great American photographer, who towards the end of his life really saw the worker and the machine working together beautifully, whereas in the early part of his career, he was more of a social critic. This is a very, many of the photographs that I'm showing you this afternoon are very well-known photographs in the history of American photography. This is by Eugene Smith, and Eugene Smith was a famous Life magazine photographer, and he's photographing a Spanish funeral. And this was a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph taken in Africa by Kevin Carter, and shortly after this photograph, the photographer committed suicide. There was a lot to be said about this, and more so than we can say right now. So what helped, oh, and this is, of course, a photograph of Nagasaki and in 1945, the atomic bombing of the Italian city. So I did just show you 4 photographs that were intensely subject-oriented. But another thing that I want us to look at is the frame. How do we use the frame in a photograph? I'm going to be showing you just a couple of photographs by Edward Weston, another great American photographer. And here you can see that the frame is very close to the Nautilus shell. And I think that this really makes the curves of that shell much more striking. This is another Edward Weston photograph. And again, by coming in so closely to the subject, you can almost touch that subject. And this is by our own Dylan Vitone, and you have 6 photographs of Dylan in your hall, and Dylan's a wonderful colleague of mine, and you can see by the way he has framed, he's using the frame in a more elongated panoramic way, you can see many different activities going on in that photograph. And this is a photograph by David Hockney, and you can see many photographs within the frame of one photograph. So he's compositing images to create a photograph, a portrait of his mother. Time. Photographs are often thought of a slice of time and a cone of space. We're going to be looking at time. This is a great photograph. I love it. It's by Edward Muybridge, and he is the first person to show us how horses actually run, because he had developed the technology to stop time very, very quickly. And with this photograph of horses running in the I think it's in the 1880s, I think I have the date, 1879. he showed us that how horses had been drawn by artists was all wrong. But when horses have their four hoofs off the ground, they're not flailing out, they're kind of tucked in. So it was the photographic truth that really explained to us and described how horses actually ran. Here's another photograph, and this is by Harold Edgerton. I guess it's right up there. And Edgerton was an MIT scientist. He's no longer alive. And I think that his work is as artful as any art photography there is. He developed the he developed the strobe, which is the electronic flash. So he could show us what the naked eye could not see. And this is another one of his. You may have seen some of these images. These are quite famous. And then that's an Elliot Erwitt. And I'm not sure how dogs are accepted in Qatar, but Elliot Erwitt photographs dogs quite a lot. Space. And when we press the shutter, we also define the space of a photograph through the aperture setting. Whether we use the camera's one-point perspective, create an illusion of endless space, or we show the photograph as a flat plane. We can also show multiple perspectives, as I'm going to show you in another David Hockney photograph. So to tell you a little bit about the art market, this photograph was done in 2013, and the title is Chicago Board of Trade 3, and it sold for, that's the scale of the image. This was, it was shown at the Museum of Modern Art, and it sold for 2.2 million pounds, an auction record for a Gursky exchange photo. So that was Andreas Gursky, and 2.2 million pounds. I don't get it, but maybe the art market does. Vantage point, oh, actually this is still space, I'm sorry. I just wanted to show this Paul Caponegro photograph because I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And then the David Hockney. Now David Hockney, and I showed you the photograph of a portrait of his mother earlier, was very interested in seeing an object through multiple perspectives. So you can see he was very literate about art history and the world, and he was very affected by Cubism. And you can see that in the making of this photograph, he's seeing the chair from multiple space points of view, etc. Vantage point. All photographs are made from a camera that sees the subject from a point of view. We can interpret this vantage point as both an objective or a physical point of view, as well as a subject one. So this is one of the heroes of nature photography, Ansel Adams, with his 8x10 view camera on the top of his car because he needed a certain point of view. The vantage point is where you choose to see your subject. And this is an Ansel Adams. And this is a Richard Avedon. You can see the vantage point is so different. He is very close up to his subject. The writer Isaac Ninnis, went ahead. Isaac Dinesen, and another Edward Weston. Edward Bertensky, a Canadian photographer who I think is one of the best contemporary photographers working today. And then light. And this is one of my favorite components of a photograph. The world revealed to us by light, and all photographs depend on light to create their images, whether it is soft and evocative or direct and harsh. Another Ansel Adams. An apple with light feeling as though light is emanating from within. And I wanted to just put this photograph up, which is by Eugene Smith, and show you that you could take a photograph and you can interpret it through any of those line items that I just drew out for you. You can look at the subject, you can look at the frame, you can look at time, you can look at space, vantage point, light. There are other ways you can start looking at photographs. You could look at color, you could look at surface, but these are ones that I think are very important. And I want to show you that photograph because I think it's a brilliant photograph. It's also a photograph that was in the famous Family of Man exhibition. This was probably the most famous exhibition of all time. It's actually still available. It has a permanent installation in Belgium. And it was launched in 1955 at the Museum of Modern Art, and that photograph by Eugene Smith ended the exhibition, and it actually ends the book. Eugene Smith was covering the war effort in the Pacific during World War II, and he suffered innumerable injuries. He was laid up for 2 years and had multiple hospital stays, and this was the first photograph that he took after as he recuperated. This was the first photograph that he took. It was of his 2 children, and it's an absolutely beautiful one. We could talk more about what happens, but I also want to talk to you about something that I use in my own work, and that is words. Not all photographs need words, but words and photographs are a powerful combination. Words may provide voice, they may provide important context, they may provide essential information, and they may provide a narrative. One person's work who I enjoy showing when I talk about words is Jeffrey Norman's work. You can see that this photograph could be interpreted as a bag of lunch, a bomb, or a surprise. And also, when we're looking at this, are we looking at it something that from the inside or something from the outside? So the word most definitely is going to help you define how you see and read that photograph. And in today's world, with so many images on Facebook, Instagram, news sites, a new question arises. Are we better consumers and makers of visual information? Oh, I'm sorry. These are 2 photographs of my own where I'm using my daughter and her words, her little poem about her eyes, and then another child. I work with girls for a number of years, and I made photographs of them and had them write in response to the photograph. And now I want to ask, are we better consumers of visual information, or are we just picture gluttons? This is an installation by Dutch artist Eric Kessels. Might Kessels be suggesting that we live in a time of image overload? And if this is the case, even though we live in a visual culture, are we better consumers of visual information, or we no longer see the differences between the Facebook post, the artful portrait, or the news photo? Are all images now the same, just easily readable content with little impact? And most important, are photos no longer to be trusted? We could also ask if they should ever have been trusted. So with this Eric Kessels installation piece, this was in a gallery, he printed out all the photographs that were uploaded onto Instagram in a 24-hour period. And this is what he got. I teach 2 kinds of photo classes. One is predominantly about going out into the world and making photographs. The other is about understanding how photographs function in our world through readings and writing assignments. In both courses, there's much discussion as we become more visually literate and intelligent about visual culture. For example, when looking at news photography, we realize there is no objective truth, that this tragic photo of a Haitian girl killed by police for looting after the devastating earthquake in 2010 would be an entirely different image to the world if the photographers shooting the girl were seen instead. In my courses, we learn to decode and read photographs. We see how photographs are not neutral vessels of facts. We become less naive and more sophisticated communicators. Why I love photography. Photos are portals to other worlds, and we learn a lot from photographs. From photos, I learn about other cultures, my own and others' histories, science, happiness, sadness, empathy. Almost every aspect of life on Earth can be shown and captured by a photograph. Most recently in class, I asked students to bring in a photo that has great meaning for them and to write a 1 to 2 page response on why that photo has meaning. In that one class, we talked about NASA's space program when Lizzie brought in the blue marble. We talked about John's love of skateboarding when he shared a magazine image of Mark Gonzalez, his role model. We talked about privilege and life in India when Rubini brought in this haunting photograph by Steve McCurry. And we entered World War II when Rachel brought in this moving photograph of American soldiers landing on Normandy Beach, the event that turned the war around for the Allies in World War II. In addition, we talked about powerful photographs such as Eugene Smith's photo of a mother bathing her daughter. The daughter was deformed because of mercury poisoning in the water of the fishing village where the family lived. And many, many children were being deformed because of the poisoning. These are just a few examples of the photograph's richness, where we are brought into different times, events, cultures, places, etc. Photographs create community in and out of the classroom. Community is important to me, and there are two aspects of community that I will address. First, the community that develops in the classroom when we look at photographs together, especially in that experience that we call the crit. And second, literally taking students into the community to make photographs. In the classroom, the crit. The crit is an experience in the classroom that we in the visual arts know well. It's an essential part of our time together as students, teachers, and practitioners. We may do it so often that it can become quite a daily grind, something that we don't really think about as we're doing it because it's so familiar. But the crit is layered and complex, and is something that could be surprising to outside eyes and ears. The crit relies heavily on the presence of a strong community of artists, students, and teachers who build relationships based on respect, empathy, and a genuine desire to help hone the work of another photographer. We can shift one another's perspectives through the crit, just as we can shift one another's perspectives through photography. We can create growth through the crit, just as we grow through making photographs. In the classroom, we are comrades, each other's mates, and trust is essential. I consider myself experienced in photography. I've been teaching photography at university level for over 3 decades, and I am an active photographer. Often we experience photographs in a solitary way. We read news articles with accompanying photographs on screen and in print alone. We look at books of fine art photographs alone, and we look at photos on our digital devices alone, to name just a few examples. But when we take a class, there is a community aspect to the medium. We're all eyes and ears in the crit. Dialogue flows, we walk up close to images to see their sharpness, their tones, their shadows, their light, their music, and we connect with others in the healthy setting of the classroom. I always appreciated the crit. It's the method for teaching a visual language. All in the classroom in unison are respectfully focused on one student and her work. And the word respect here is key, for respect is essential to maintaining community. And ours is devoted to sharpening minds and creating empathy by the friction of interaction and conversation. During a semester, I remind my students that when they leave the university, they will lose the built-in captive audience of 10 to 15 individuals giving thoughtful feedback on their work. When they graduate, I hope that they find those people in their lives, as I have, who may or may not be photographers, whose eyes and minds they trust to continue to show their work to, so that they still have community and do not work in isolation. We are fortunate to learn photography in a classroom setting. A few summers ago, I had the opportunity to jury work from the Athens Photographic Project. The photographers who participate in this program are not the regular college crowd. For the most part, these are students of varying ages living with mental illness. On the website, the APP describes itself as a nonprofit program that promotes mental health recovery by providing opportunities for community members living with mental illness to express themselves creatively through photography. When I mentioned to Dylan Vitone, my colleague, that I was jurying this work, his response was, "Wouldn't it be great to sit in on those crits, to be a fly on those walls?" That got me thinking more about the value of the crit, an activity that should never become bland. In my jury statement for the AAP exhibition, I wrote, "Yesterday I viewed many photographs made by student artists. I entered photographs that showed fear, vulnerability, mystery, but also joy in life. I saw the lightness and beauty of a feather, the random appearance and desperately sad look of a dog poking his head out of a car window, the wrath of a startled cat, distorted rhythms of red brick buildings, stunning jazzy surfaces that atomize physical reality. I was impressed by the freshness of the beginning artists. as well as the coherency of the advanced artist portfolios. In both groups, however, I wish that I had been part of the discussion about the work. As a stone creates ripples when it is tossed into the water, the ripples are as fascinating, beautiful, and as important as the stone. An image, like an inert stone, can be static. It is made up of pixels on a screen or ink dotted on paper. It becomes dynamic when the conversation ensues and connections are made. We make images from the experience of our life, but the image is not the end of the road. Just as important is the community that is made when the image is put out there for others to view. At the APP exhibition, all of the photographs were accompanied by the students' own text. You can tell from these short statements how supportive, caring, and safe the teaching environment was. This is entitled Stand Alone, and these are students writing that accompany their photographs. I noticed this lonely clump of leaves as I was walking through the cold one day this winter. In a way, I found myself relating to the leaves. I used to feel that I was completely isolated, that I did not belong, and that my opinions didn't matter. Like a clump of snow in this image, my problems accumulated and weighed me down. But with a little assistance from the sun, the snow will melt away. Photography has helped me see that I can't do it alone either, and that with the help and support of others, my problems will also begin to fade. Okay, this is called Toxic Rainbow. Rainwater intensifies the colors in the oil. I find this rainbow to be beautiful even though it is toxic to the environment. I'm attracted to puddles like this one despite the fact that I care so much about the earth. I'm working really hard. I took this self-portrait in order to express my anger about racism. I will not tolerate it anymore. I want to ask the world, other than our skin being black, what have we done wrong? Getting involved in APP and taking photographs helps me deal with issues that I do not understand. Looking beyond. This photograph makes me feel as though there are two realities, the clear truth and the foggy imagination. I may not be able to discern reality in my life at times, but there is always a twisted, colorful light that leads me to the next day. Photography has increased my sense of self-worth as an artist. Getting involved in APP has given me purpose and has placed me in a warm community of people who face challenges similar to mine. Piercing through. This image is a metaphor for how I feel about mental illness. Life is beautiful, soft, fruitful, but at times mental illness pierces through, trying to break me. I do not mean to suggest that a crit should be therapy or a mental health support group, but in a crit, we are talking about things that are important to us in the world, in our communities, in our families, and in our lives. Through work and conversation in the crit, we put our values and our innards out there for others to see. The Athens Photographic Project artists probably use photography more than most to visualize their inner states. Their mission, as I mentioned, is to aid in recovery from mental illness. But I believe that most of us in creative fields externalize our inner states to a greater or lesser extent and share deep values through our work. When we sit down on crits, we feel empathy and we use our mind's eyes, emotions to comprehend someone else's pictured reality, and we aim to help that individual strengthen his or her visualizations. In doing so, we make important connections with each other. How to make photographs is naturally a goal of my classes. How to make coherent statements, express personal voice, vision, and use the medium to communicate ideas. But the photograph is only part of the equation. We need to pause and recognize the connections created among people when photographs are put out there, whether it is when photographs are pinned up on a wall, as in the crit, or in the world in another way. Photographs are a profound form of communication, whether they may be selfies or images of war-torn countries. For decades, crits have been part of my teaching practice, and before then, a part of my student life. In fact, I even remember my first crit because I felt weirdly uncomfortable. When I was a student, the crit was memorable because it was so novel. Then through the decades, it's become routinely what I do. But now, because of my recent experience judging the Athens Photographic Project exhibition, I see that the crit should be treated as a sacred learning space. There is a Zen saying, I saw a mountain, then I didn't, then I did. I relate to this saying. As a student, I physically experienced a crit, and then after years of critiquing, I took it for granted, and now with fresh insight, I appreciate and honor it more. And now I want to leave the community of the classroom to talk about bringing my students into the Pittsburgh community. As a photographer and as a teacher, I'm always concerned with making photographs, and photographs in some form are my end product. They may find themselves in a handmade book, a PDF, sent to a D-list, or as prints on the wall. But often, the end product eclipses the process of getting there. As a young photographer, I found nothing as exciting as producing a good photograph, which then took the form of a print. As I became more proficient and started to produce a body of photographs, there was nothing more rewarding than having an exhibition of my work. And I really lucked out if there was some kind of printed takeaway, a catalog. I was exhilarated by the next giant step when a large number of my photographs appeared in my first book, even though those images were printed on uncoated paper, scaled smaller than the 4x5 negatives from which they came, and in no way matched the presence of the 16x20 exhibition prints. And as years accumulated, I experienced additional achievements that became line items on my vita, which I needed to be credible to the institution where I worked. These experiences were about the photograph as end product. Those are some covers of the books that I've worked on. And I want to also say that those aren't just my books. I most often work collaboratively with writers. So each one of those books is done with image and word with a writer. But it is important to recognize the connections made between people when we use the camera in the world. When I photograph on the street, I rarely have a solitary experience because I am actively engaged with activities outside myself. And that is an aspect of photography that I love. Certainly when I wielded a view camera, but even now with my DSLR, my camera is noticed and conversations easily flow. I learned to value the experience of making photographs, finding rewards in the people who I met on the street, who I would never meet or converse with otherwise, or being inspired by neighborhood architecture and or folk art on brick walls. If the photographs from a shoot were duds, I learned it had less consequence because my street interactions mattered. I became a bit more human because of exposure to humans. I became a bit more worldly by being in the world. Although I teach many different kinds of photography from studio to documentary to personal narrative, I'm especially committed to how photography can be used in the community to influence lives, the lives of those with less privilege than my students. I also believe it is important for students to venture outside the academic bubble. Each year I offer a project-oriented course that connects my students with a marginalized group through partnering with a social service agency, or I teach a more generalized documentary course. My students have worked with moms who were addicts and experienced homelessness, as well as their children. We have worked with female offenders in the Allegheny County Jail, and we have worked with individuals in a sober living facility. In these courses, we see if and how photography can be used to strengthen bonds between a child and a mother who is now clean and sober, aid people in recovery, and generally how photography can be used for positive effects, especially in the lives of people who have faced adversity. This may seem like a naive and excessively optimistic use of photography, but our results, although not quantifiable, are unquestionably positive for the students and our subjects, who we see as our collaborators. In these courses, the camera is an invaluable tool that bridges people. On the bottom are my students, and on the top photograph are women who we've worked with. As one of my students writes, there is magic in the space between two people interacting around the camera. Photos are taken, the camera is handed back and forth, people pose, and moments are shared. It is in this space that people start to open up and trust one another. A bond is made and communities begin with bonds. There's preparation for the project-oriented courses. For about a month before we meet, our subjects, we photograph the neighborhoods where they live. We listen to guests who are experienced with our subjects' hardships and build connections with each other in the classroom. For example, we explore why we sign up for such a class. Some students open up about their own family secrets. Addiction affects all socioeconomic and ethnic groups. And we begin weekly process of writing 1 to 2 page responses relating to all aspects of photographing and working with people who we initially perceive as vastly different from ourselves. These written reflections are an excellent means through which we can remember experiences, gauge our personal growth, understand the role of the documentarian, and explore the ethics of what we are doing. As Joan Didion has said, I don't know what I think until I write it down. I believe that writing helps my students understand the complexity and responsibility of representing the other, helps them understand their own motivations for working in the field, and helps them make better photographs too. Photographs create empathy. I'm going to read you some excerpts from my students' papers. Lena on contrasts. As I walked around the neighborhood with my expensive DSLR and left the neighborhood in Mimi's nice BMW, I could not stop thinking about the contrast between my life and the lives of these families and how they will react to someone like me walking into their life. Am I invading their privacy by standing in front of their house and pointing my camera without asking? Patrick on stereotypes. Initially, I focused my photographs on what I thought I should be getting out of this first trip and what I expected this neighborhood to look like. The broken chairs, the flat tires, the rusted bicycle. Then I thought about it. Was this actually what I was seeing, or was this what I wanted to see? Could I find a way to portray this neighborhood in a positive light? Who am I to focus on the cracks in the sidewalk? Laura on self-consciousness. I was photographing a house and I saw a little boy behind the windows on the second floor. The window was dirty, so I could not see his facial expression. But for a moment, I wondered if he would suddenly run down the stairs and demand for me to leave. There are many questions to be answered. Eunice on the neighborhood. Today I went to the neighborhood for the first time. I had no preconceptions and didn't know what to expect. From the car, I walked out onto a humble and quiet street where many homes were worn down and some seemed vacant. I wanted to capture the stillness I was experiencing. It was an unusually beautiful day with the sun shining through the branches of the trees to illuminate the homes with a warm glow despite their forsaken state. I wondered what kind of stories the people living here carried with them. It was a funny thing to think about because the juxtaposition between the family struggles and the serenity of the present was a powerful contrast. While I was thinking about this, a young boy popped his head out of one of the homes and watched us take pictures. It was strange to be watched, but it was a little bit exciting. In the midst of the silence, there was a person entering the picture. Lena on faith. Virgie is a Baptist, and I am a Catholic. These religions are very different practices, but both of us share many of the same values and beliefs. Virgie is a true witness to her faith and has shown me the healing power of positivity. She has faced so many hardships in her life and still has many things that are unresolved problems. But her ability to, as she says, put them in the Lord's hands is inspirational to me. It is refreshing to hear someone who at first I really didn't know very well witness her faith so strongly. I feel that so often, especially now that I'm in college, I cannot talk about my faith and what it has taught me. Talking to Virgie about these things gave me immense comfort and reminded me that I always have my own faith to turn to when I am struggling. Mimi on our collaborators. Before in classes, when Charlie referred to the people that she worked with as collaborators, I did not fully understand. Collaboration implies equal parts of work from each person involved. My thought process led me to believe that the photographer was essentially the one doing the work, so the one being photographed did not play an equal role. After interacting with Veronica, I now realize that without a willing participant and collaborator, the photographer cannot tell the full story. Without Veronica's willingness to let Laura and me into her life and tell us about her past, our project would have been empty and shallow. Mimi and Lena on the academic bubble. Carnegie Mellon is an excellent university, and we consider ourselves lucky to be students here. A college education is a privilege not accessible to all. We learn a great deal from our classes, and although flustered at times by the weight and demands of a college curriculum, we appreciate every lecture, assignment, project, and conversation we encounter on campus. 7 students from across the university enrolled in the course Photography and Family, coming from fields as diverse as architecture, history, mechanical engineering, and design. The course did not promise to impart us with a certain skill set or knowledge that we needed to fulfill our majors, but we enrolled in it precisely because it offered something different. For us, photography and family was one of the most fulfilling and valuable courses at Carnegie Mellon because we could explore outside of the academic bubble. In traveling to Sojourner House to meet our families, we left our comfort zones in many ways and quickly realized that the problems that we faced at school, busy schedules, lots of homework, stressful exams, did not compare to the problems faced by these women and their children. While we worried if our professors would grant extensions on projects, the women at Sojourner House worked to overcome addiction and homelessness, sought employment, and took care of many children. Photography and family introduced us to these women's realities. We learned from mothers as they managed lives complicated by their former drug addictions, and through them, we also saw our own privilege more clearly. Photography and family expanded our knowledge of the world immediately around us, which can be easy to disregard when seen through the filter of relatively carefree lives. Throughout the semester, we heightened our sensitivity to an understanding of others and redefined our understanding of what it means to be educated. While coursework gives us knowledge to become problem solvers in the professional world, we saw the women at Sojourner House were also problem solvers, but in a different way. They were improving their lives and their children's lives by overcoming addiction and handling challenges every day as they sent kids off to school, kept clean and sober, and stayed healthy. We learned that there is more than book learning in a college education, and that we are taught by all types of people, not just our professors. Virgie shared invaluable wisdom with Lena, Mimi learned from Veronica that nothing is for sure, and Nikel taught us that all you have to do is be willing to change. Our Sojourner House experiences are now a part of our Carnegie Mellon education. My students' experiences with their cameras on familiar and unfamiliar streets connect them with people who they may never meet otherwise. Instead of stereotypes, my students talk to individuals, real people. Cameras help to bridge disparate places, and my students become more understanding of and knowledgeable about the world that we all inhabit. They also learn empathy. This past year, my husband and I went to hear a lecture by Fareed Zakaria, renowned journalist and author. He spoke to the audience about the Middle East and its deeply rooted problems. In the Q&A at the end of his lecture, the last question posed to Zakaria went something like this: given the deeply entrenched problems of the Middle East, how do we start making things better? Zakaria paused, thought, and replied, and I paraphrase, we should bring people together, not as government representatives, but just as people meeting people. Likewise, I think that bringing people together is what our Doha campus is doing, resulting in immeasurable good. And that, too, is what I hope photography does in my class. I'd like to end now with a series of photographs by Noura Al-Mufta. I met Noura when she came to our Pittsburgh campus 2 years ago and took a short 6-week independent study with me, while at the same time she was taking a rigorous science course. Noura was as hardworking and as talented as any student I have ever taught. She is a graduating senior with a bioengineering major. At one point, I asked her how she gets all her work done. She said something to the effect that CMU students are hardworking. I'm proud to show you her work, how a young person was adventurous, walking Pittsburgh streets, seeing its rhythms and stories, taking in life, and learning a lot about another culture and photography in the process. I think everyone likes ice cream. So these are all Noura's photographs. So that's Pittsburgh, mainly downtown in the neighborhoods. Now we have 3 self-portraits. And then I end with Noura's statement, which is, she writes, why do you take self-portraits? Someone asked her that question, and she responded, One reason is that when I grow older and look back at my younger years, I want to remember that I was strong and independent, and that I was able to go to different places and experience other cultures that opened my eyes to the world around me. Thank you. Yes.
Fascinating to me, and but I think nowadays with the digital photography being so available to everyone, everyone on their phone can take picture anytime they want. What do you think about photography being disruptive to our life? You go for dinner and you can't enjoy your food till you take a picture of it.
Yeah.
And what do you think of that?
I think it's absolutely true. It's become a ritual that's in our everyday lives now. And I hope that we have a way of still enjoying the dinner. Maybe after the dinner we can look at the dinner, you know, and still continue to enjoy it. But I do think that this was an idea, a notion that photography really interferes with life, that ever since snapshot photography was around since the 1880s, there have been people writing about is the photograph making us enjoy the event less because we're very conscious of photographing it. I think with cameras, with smart cameras or smartphones, I think that photography is integrated into our life now. I think it's a shame, though, that we're so glued to the smartphone. I remember once a friend's mother wanted me to take photographs of her daughter's birthday party, and I didn't want to take photographs. I wanted to enjoy the party, but I took the photographs for her. But I do think that some people can get more intensely engaged because they have that camera. And with many people, it's experiencing the immediacy of the event very differently. It's through a lens.
Thank you for the fantastic talk. I have a question about photography, that most of your pictures and most of the work refer to Western contemporary photography and pieces that were either in the West. What do you think about the fact that so much of the Middle East or people who may have objections to photography just remains undocumented, and we might miss out on something that is very important part of our world?
Can you repeat that question again?
So I'm saying that most of the pictures and photography that you talked about was about the Western world.
Yes.
And focused on contemporary photography that was related to the US or UK.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But there are certain objections regarding photography maybe in the Middle East and Muslim culture.
Yes.
And we miss out on a lot of part of life here being documented through photography.
Yes.
Is there any comment that you can make about that, or how maybe we can access that part? Because as far as my personal experience goes, I think the life in Qatar over here is very rich, but that is not from an outsider's perspective, because when I was in Pakistan, it was completely different because I didn't see the photographs while I was there. But here, when I see firsthand, it's a very different way. But I can see what's happening in Pittsburgh through Noura's unwritten memoirs, but not what's happening in Qatar locally.
I think there are different genres of photography. There's a genre called street photography, and Dylan Vitone works in a street method, and I think he has shown us, I just saw 40 of his photographs that he made here when he was here during 2 trips, and I think that he's bringing the look of Qatar back to the States, and so I've really appreciated looking at his work before I actually got here because it informed me so well. There is Mideastern work coming west, and I saw a wonderful exhibition of women photographers, Arab women photographers documenting their lives, and that was incredibly rich. And I wonder, in the West, we have a very open way of viewing images. I don't know how that work would have been received in a Middle Eastern country because it was very edgy. There was stuff that was very edgy in it. So I think, in fact, when I was putting the talk together, I didn't know what photographs might be inappropriate to show. I have worked in breast cancer. I worked on a project for years with a friend, and I don't think it would have been appropriate to show some of that work here. So I was always questioning how the cultures are different and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. But I do think that, I think there's a ton interesting here. I think that this would be a great place to photograph. I would love to come back and photograph here. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but thank you. Yes?
Two quick questions. One is, how do you see the role of the camera? I mean, better ones versus the iPhone. Second one is, there's a lot of work at CMU, if I'm not mistaken, on computational photography.
On computational photography?
And how do you see that developing and impacting the dimensions you mentioned? Like the GigaPan is one example.
Yeah, the GigaPan.
Litro camera, where you can focus after you take the picture.
Yes, the Litro.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
How do you see them playing out?
I think it's great. I think they're all tools. And it was interesting. Polaroid used to have a great marketing campaign, which was they would take a Polaroid, a simple little Polaroid print, and say, this is in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. And it was made by an American art photographer. I saw something done the same with Apple the other day. It said, this photograph was made by an iPhone. And so I think we're just dealing with tools. And I don't think there's one tool that produces art or produces good imagery. I think that every time you pick up a tool, it's going to give you a different effect. So a view camera will give you, a 4x5 negative will give you a very different effect than a point and shoot camera. So you work within the framework that your technology gives you. So I think you can make art with just a point and shoot.
Thank you, Charlie.